Welcome to another episode of Dr. Doctor, the award-winning radio show and podcast featuring your physician hosts, Dr. Tom McGovern
and Dr. Chris Stroud. And on this show, we will discuss relevant health-related topics and always from an authentically Catholic perspective. Dr. Doctor is brought to you in part by the generous underwriting of our friends at CMF Curo. You can learn more at mycatholichealthcare.org, and you can live your Catholic faith in your healthcare with CMF Curo.
Today, our guest will be heard across the EWTN Global Catholic Radio Network. Joining us today will be Monica Ashour. She is the president, co-founder, content creation director, and a speaker for Tobit, not Tobit, the book in the Old Testament, Tobit, the Theology of the Body Evangelization Team, based in Irving, Texas, just outside of Dallas. And she is an expert on all things theology of the body. Chris, what makes this topic so relevant to our listeners today?
Yeah, listeners will probably think, oh, body, it's doctor, that's medicine. But no, that's not it. We're actually talking about theology of the body. And more specifically, I think she'll be talking about this concept of identity. We're being inundated today with this idea of identity. How do you identify? Do you identify as a man or as a woman or as a tree or as a bird? And how is this determined? I mean, what is about this identity? Can it change? Who am I? How do I know who I am? Why am I here? For what purpose? I mean, these are all pretty heady questions that fascinatingly are answered through a better understanding of the theology of the body. I mean, these are serious, important questions that are being asked. And I would argue in many cases, the answers are being provided from people who have an agenda that may not be the same as you and I and our listeners. And in many cases, they go against church teaching, sound reasoning, and natural law. So this really is a medical topic because it's about the body. It's about gender. It's about who we are and why we are that. We need to understand this as parents, as healthcare consumers, as Catholics. We need to understand it, and we need to make those around us understand it.
You know, I think I've almost been immunized against this topic because I've been hearing about it for decades. And I think, all right, yes, we're embodied souls. We're embodied creatures. The body is meant. It's the only way we can be a gift to other people. Okay, I get that. And it's like, if there's anything else there, I've just kind of got this shell around me. So I'm hoping that my shell of ignorance gets pierced today. And I see some new insights that go, oh my goodness, I'm glad I now know this. But I just feel like, and I don't know if there's other Catholics out there like that. Maybe there are, and maybe what Monica says will help to open up new vistas of understanding for you too.
Yeah, and this you hear theology of the body, and you think, oh, that's about abstinence and don't have sex before marriage. That's selling theology of the body way too short, and I think she'll make that clear. But this is a critical topic. Just recently, you and I have done shows on this whole idea of gender affirming care, and that has to do with identity and the body and understanding how the body's made and why it's made that way, and oh, by the way, who made it that way. And why. I like to listen to Father John Riccardo and some of his podcasts. And there's a prayer that he talks about a lot where he says, with all the earnest you can gather, say to God, what's the name by which you call me? In other words, what am I? What am I to you, God? And why am I that? And what am I supposed to do with that? Well, that is right in theology of the body. And I think we're probably going to learn a lot about that with our guest tonight.
Yeah, that question, who am I, is profound. In researching it, in Revelation, it says that after we're in heaven, God will reveal to us that name, which is only known between him and me, that he has for us. Because we were, in some ways, we can't answer the question, who I am, except in relation to him.
Yeah, but this is a medical topic because of all the diseases that you and I and our colleagues can help treat, if we don't understand who we are and why we are that and what that means, antibiotics for a cold, they're really not going to help.
That's right. They aren't. And I know that Monica spoke this year and last year at the annual education conference of the Catholic Medical Association. And I know that many doctors have been helped by what she said. I did not get to hear it, but she did share with me her slide deck. So it's helped in preparing questions for this. And I can also tell you that one of my 16-year-old sons has been taking an online course from her on the theology of the body and absolutely loving it. So I know that she connects well with people, and she travels all over the country talking about this.
We're supposed to be able to defend the faith that we have, right? And so understanding these topics are critical to us as parents, as consumers of information, and certainly as Catholics.
And I hope it gives us a better language for talking to people who are confused about what gender is as opposed to sex, and about determining what your gender is, or even with same-sex attraction. How does that fit in with that? And I've got one question in there. I can't wait to hear the answers. How does this even matter to people who disagree with us on those topics? Is there something in here that's attractive to them that might get them to think in a different way? I can't wait to hear that.
Yeah, so much of the rhetoric, and that's what it is, around this gender idea, it is just really sort of made up information. Well, we're going to learn in Theology of the Body, it isn't made up. It's natural law. It's why we were created this way, which is much more powerful evidence, we would argue, than just the latest politically popular theory that's floating around on YouTube.
Well, before we get to Monica, let's go to our medical trivia question of the day. And the category, we get all these sex and gender things, and I keep having to come up with new things. So here's a new thing. Sex differences in metabolism. Okay, so there are differences, or are there? Question. In a review article entitled Sex Differences in Energy Metabolism Need to be Considered with Lifestyle Modifications in Humans. Yeah, what a title. Published 10 years ago in the Journal of Nutrition Metabolism, the authors revealed which of the following three statements to be true. Only one of these is true. A, women store more percent body fat than men because they eat more calories per kilogram of lean body mass than men. Or B, do women store more percent body fat than men even though they eat about the same calories per kilogram of lean body mass as men? Or C, do women store more percent body fat than men despite the fact that they eat less calories per kilogram of lean body mass than men? You'll get the right answer at the end of the show, but before that, we'll be back after the break on Dr. Doctor with Monica Ashour and the Theology of the Body and My Body, My Identity. Welcome back to Dr. Doctor, where we have today Monica Ashour. She's a graduate of the University of Dallas. She has a master's in theological studies and a master's in humanities. She's the president, international speaker, and content creation director for the Theology of the Body Evangelization Team, known as TOBET. She's the author of 28 books. 28 is a perfect number, by the way, like 6. Anyway, including the internationally disseminated The Body Matters, a curriculum for preschool through high school students based on none other than St. John Paul's Theology of the Body. She was named one of the top 20 Catholic women speakers and has spoken at the last 4 Catholic Medical Association national conferences and was recently published in the Lineker Quarterly. Monica, welcome to Dr. Doctor.
Hi, I'm so glad to be here. Thank you, Tom and Chris, for bringing me on.
Yeah, thank you for giving us some of your time and some of your expertise on the body, as it were.
Yeah, which is something we take care of every day. So doctors like Chris and me often talk and think about patients' bodies. Who knew? In terms of how well they're operating according to the Creator's specifications. But your main idea is talking about what the body means. Explain that concept to us.
Well, I get it from Pope John Paul. The term he coined, I would call the language of the body. It's very different, I think, from body language. That's like my own idiosyncrasies. But language of the body, I would say, means the objective truth of God's design for the body. And so when I give talks to little ones, or the 5th grade book is called The Body Speaks a Language, the mantra is certain bodily actions mean certain things. So we know what a punch means. You doctors know what a stomach ache means. And so that's what I was trying to bring to doctors. Like, if you help them to understand the meaning behind their aches and pains, they're going to be more owning the truth of their body, is the way I look at it.
So,
I think listeners would be fascinated, the ones that don't know, but it's not as though Saint Pope John Paul said one day, I think I'll write a book and call it Theology of the Body. Maybe you could give us just a little background for listeners. What are we talking about when we say we get this from John Paul II?
Great. That's a great question. At the beginning of his pontificate, he became Pope when I was in seventh grade, 1979. And what he did was he gave us the theology of the body. Actually, I think he became Pope 78. In
correct.
September 5th, 1979 through November 28, 1984, he gave weekly audiences, and they're becoming, it's well known as the Theology of the Body. Here's my book. It's kind of falling apart, but this is a compilation of 133 talks by Pope John Paul, and that's what people mean by the theology of the body. He actually named it man and woman, he created them, which is from Genesis 1:27. And many people think it's, just about sexuality and marriage. It is not. It is so much broader, so much richer than all of that. And that's why I've had to write so many books. Me as a single woman, never been married and, never had children, but I live the theology of the body. And I think you doctors can really help disseminate theology of the body just by living your practice properly as a good doctor.
Now, some would say that, us Christians, we stumble a bit when we try to talk about the body. Medical people are otherwise, as opposed to talking about our souls or our spirits. Why is that? Why do we struggle to talk about the body?
Well, I think, it's a whole number, many answers. We could go through the historical answer, things like that. What I'm wondering is if people saw the secularization that was coming, like in the early 1900s, and so we wanted to make sure that we all remembered that we are gods, we have a spirit. Pope Benedict Emeritus, he says that the soul is nothing other than that space, you might say, where God loves us, and then we are meant to love in return. So isn't that an important concept? But I think Pope John Paul saw the fact that our culture, we think, maybe glorifies the body, and it does with tattoos and all sorts of various things. But if we as Catholic Christians, as Christians in general, don't start talking about the body, I think we're going to lose another generation. What I say in my talks is, how many times does he use the word soul in the theology of the body? 55 times. How about spirit? 91 times. How about body? The answer is 1,319 times. I think that shows you that he saw that we needed to talk about the body and the body's meaning.
Okay, so you talk about the body being our identity. What does that mean? And then what is the role for the soul in our identity?
Great. So in the back of all of these books, so these are the Body Matters books, my team and I realized we needed to put a definition of the word body, because otherwise people will think we're materialists. But what we say here is that Jesus Christ himself says, "This is my body." And so that's how we mean body. Pope John Paul says the body is a revelation of the person. He'll say, look, a body that reveals the person. I think, in my opinion, he's getting away from the Cartesian, Rene Descartes, the dualism, where we have to say body and soul. Instead, let's see ourselves as a body person, so that even in our lingo, we don't have to say body and soul. We just say we are body persons. We are people who are subjects of our own lives, meant to follow Jesus Christ for now and all eternity. So I hope that answers your questions, Tom.
So we're body persons, but angels are nobody persons, right? They're nobodies, right? I mean, literally.
They are nobodies.
Right.
I
Although
don't think
they appear to have one.
I hope this doesn't play on the feast of the archangels. You might be
No,
haunted by them by saying that. What I would
if
say is, what I would say is, God created the angels,
right,
and how wonderful they are. Only spirit. But you know what? Some people say this is not public revelation, it's private revelation, so people don't have to believe it. But some
sure,
people say that the reason why Satan fell is because God showed him that angels would have to serve humans
right.
and that the Son of God would become human and they would have to worship this body person, Jesus Christ. And he's like, I'm out. The body is so bad. So you might
Ah,
consider that interesting private revelation.
so isn't calling the body my identity? Can that sound like the opposite era of Descartes, who basically said the soul was our identity? How is it not the opposite?
Yeah, great question. And that's where the word body needs to be clarified. So, we Catholics, we take a sacramental view of reality so seriously, or we ought to. So, in my opinion, the theology of the body is meant to have us understand the truth of who we are. And you can't know your identity unless you know that the visible matters. And then that gets us in touch with the invisible. So
Okay,
that's the definition of a sacrament, a visible sign of this
right.
invisible reality which brings about that reality. So I hope that answers that.
So,
Good
if
question.
we fast forward to sort of pop culture of the moment, and this idea that the body matters, how does that interact with or not interact with this idea that, well, my body's one thing, but I can decide that I'm actually something else? It sort of gets to the Michael Knowles, what is a woman? That requires a body. But how do those two work?
Right. That's a great question, Chris, because so it's TOB 59, I think it's 59.3. Pope John Paul says this statement that he wrote in the early 80s in the Theology of the Body. He says that man, and he means men and women, no longer identifies himself with his own body. And how terrible is that?
Uh,
So, if we don't identify with our own body and all I go by are the feelings, I would say nowadays it's not even soul, it's my feelings that take
Hmm.
precedence over my body. How am I going to know my identity? So, I don't mean to push it so much that my body, my identity, unless you understand the word body in a sacramental way, which
mm,
includes the whole person. Pope John Paul says the body is like a sacrament. It's this visible sign that is meant to reveal the entire person. And that's the way that if we help children, especially, to understand that, then I think we're going to prevent a lot of crazy ideas that are coming along that maybe we'll talk about in a moment.
Well, and that brings us to you talk about John Paul looking at detachment as a vice. Instead of detachment from material things, he's talking about something else. What is that?
Yeah, so John of the Cross says detached from pride, materialism. Pope John Paul uses the word detachment in a different way. It
Right.
means that we don't think the body has meaning. We don't think the body matters. And
mm.
so I think this is his diagnosis of here and now, our modern person. And it's very ironic because when I used to give talks over 12 years ago, I would say that, the Protestants emphasize only the spiritual, only the soul. And by the
Right.
way, I have really good Protestants. And then it used to be, I think, the body only, not as a sacrament, but the body, the physicality only. And I was saying that TOB brought it together. But
Mm,
now what has happened is now even the secularists think the body is an enemy to my freedom. This is from R.R.
uh,
Reno in First Things Magazine. The body is an enemy to my freedom if I don't get to manipulate it, to cut it up, to do whatever I want with it. That is what detachment is. That we
mm.
don't see the body as a revelation of the person, even myself. I see it as something I can manipulate, like an object, which is a really essential part of the theology of the body.
Yeah, we sometimes as Catholics maybe get an unfair rap about being sort of anti-beauty of the body, which is hardly unfair if you look at our art and statuary and such. But speak a little bit to this idea of how wonderfully John Paul could describe the human body in beautiful terms. I can't think he was talking about mine when he did that, but apparently he could he could see the beauty in everything, but most especially the human person.
Yes, indeed. I would say, Chris, everybody is beautiful. Although what he would say about women is our most obvious feature is beauty. So sorry about that, guys. But your most obvious feature is strength. And so there you go. But let's talk about that idea of the body being this revelation of beauty. One of the things that Pope John Paul did in his pontificate is he went to the Sistine Chapel, and in the Sistine Chapel, he
Oh,
said,
yes.
"Nope, we are going to do away with the fig leaves. Get them off because that's the way they originally were." And you know what he
Yes.
renamed? He renamed the Sistine Chapel the what does he call it? Something like the sanctuary of the theology of the body. Isn't that
Oh,
crazy?
And he got a fair
Yeah.
amount of poor press over that, I think, didn't he?
I'm sure he did, because how could nakedness reveal the person, or what he says is reveals God? But that leads us like to Genesis 2:25, where he says the meaning of life is Genesis 2:25. And you know what that is? They were naked and unashamed.
Mm.
When I've given permission to talk to teenagers who are older, I'll say that. And one boy once raised his hand. He goes, "Man, was the Pope on drugs when he wrote that?" How could naked and unashamed be the meaning of life? Well, it's because it was before the fall. Before the
Sure.
fall,
yes.
Adam and Eve saw each other's body as a revelation of each other, and therefore they knew the meaning of life. They knew that they were similar enough to each other, human, but distinct from each other, male and female, that the meaning of life is love. And Pope John Paul says that's the gift of self, this giving, this receiving, and being open to others, which is why in the Theology of the Body, he says that marriage is the best natural sign and participation in God's very inner life of love.
Mm.
Man, that just kind of blows my mind and the mind of many people who hear a lot of my talks.
So, what kind of errors do people fall into in the secular society because they're detached from their bodies?
Yeah, so secular society, you name, I mean, Tom, you name anything that is in the area of sexuality that it's against the church's teaching, there it is. Whether it's sterilization, in vitro fertilization, whether it is, I don't want to say tattooing. It's similar, but it's not intrinsically evil. But things like
Right.
contraception, abortion. Notice every single one of those violates the truth and meaning of the body, and therefore, if it violates the truth of the body, it has to violate the person because the body reveals the entire person.
Now,
Pretty
you go a
profound.
little bit further in your talk, and you say that even we Christians are somewhat detached from our bodies, and this leads to a different panoply of errors.
Yeah, I would say so. I mean, so many times we Christians, like, we have forgotten that the body matters, and we set it aside. What I think about in particular is for the Catholic Christians who go into church, and it used to be we would kneel, genuflect on our right knee, and now you
Right.
look, and most people don't know to do that. They don't know to. I give talks to 36 engaged couples, my team and I, every month for the Forward Diocese. They don't know to dip their hand in holy water when I take them into the chapel. They
Uh,
don't know what this is all about. They don't know that the sanctuary lamp, shows that Christ is
Mm-hmm.
bodily present there. And so all of these things I say are because of detachment. And so that's what we have to counter in our church and in secular society.
well, with our craze over sort of what some would say is the fluidity of gender, that's really the opposite, isn't it? Or the ultimate detachment. You're saying, well, that's the body I have, but I've decided for whatever reason, it actually doesn't matter. I'm going to make it something else. It seems like that's the extreme conclusion along this line. And then that makes sort of affirming these gender confused states seem even worse.
Yeah, agreed, Chris. I mean, this is why when I gave the talk this time to the doctors, I say that y'all are evangelists just by doing your job. And another way of saying that is when you bring to light the truth of the body, then people are going to know, oh, I'm an embodied spirit. I'm an ensouled person
Mm.
with the body. And so I think that's so significant with regard to your work as medical doctors. And then, what when y'all come up to the Tobit, run Tobit, Theology, Body Evangelization Team, when y'all come up to the vendor booth and you see like one doctor, Mikey, he had bought some of my books and he's like, oh my gosh, when I first read your little board books for little ones, 1 to 4 year olds, he thought that they were good. And then he saw the trajectory. He saw that what that was doing is in his daughter's imagination, she was beginning to see, oh, my body does matter. And so it's going to thwart any secular attempt, we hope, that to take his daughter away from the truth of who she is in Jesus Christ. Let's not forget that the center of our faith, we might say, is a body, the body of Christ.
Mm.
And so, how crazy it is that this transgenderism is really affecting people nowadays. And I feel so sorry for you doctors. Like, how do y'all do it? When people come in and they say they're the opposite sex, I just don't know how you begin to treat them with things like that.
Well, and sadly, the profession now would say we shouldn't treat them because it's okay. Whatever they think they are, as opposed to giving someone who is struggling with what is a mental illness, instead of giving them care, we're affirming their pathology, which is another whole realm of sadness, I think.
Yeah. So
I
sad.
think the place that I am most interested in going, and we'll probably get in a little bit now and then after the break, but how can you keep saying that you doctors can be evangelizers for this in their practice? How? What does that look like? I have no idea.
Yeah, the great thing is that you just are the best doctor you are. In the documents of Vatican II, it speaks about the autonomy of the temporal order. And that basically means is you learn how best to examine the body of your patient. And one of the things I said in my talk at the CMA is make sure that you don't objectify the body. Now, there's a certain I think you need to abstract when you do surgery because otherwise you might start crying, like I'm cutting into this person. So there's that sort of distancing. But one of the things I gave to them, and many doctors came up to me after my talk and they're like, oh my gosh, that's so revolutionary. And it's like this tiny thing. Instead of saying something like, what are your symptoms or how are you feeling today? Direct their attention to their own body. What is your body teaching you today? You
Mm.
know, what are the symptoms coming that your body's letting you know? Why are you here in my office? It must be something about your body telling you something.
Mm.
You see that now with medical professionals who are more into psychology and counseling, there might be a different approach, but I would even say to them, make sure to integrate, our psyche, our spirit, as well as our body all together in one
I really
person.
love that.
But we need to take a break right now. We're about halfway through, and I want to come back and go really deep into what you just said, Monica, here on Dr. Doctor.
Well, welcome back to Dr. Doctor, and welcome back to more discussions of the body and its theology. Monica, listening to you, I'm an obstetrician, and I'm reminded that very often in our specialty, we're trying to convince women to trust their body and to listen to it, that they're designed to give birth. You could be an accountant if you want to, but you're designed to give birth. And it really is, it comes off as probably being secular advice, but that's not really what we're thinking. But I know a few things more beautiful, and I'm a little biased, than watching birth happen. But a woman does have to trust her design and sometimes get out of the way of the design a little bit. Do you feel like that fits with the theology of the body?
Yes, indeed, I do. The more we pay attention to what the body is telling us, then the more we're going to be able to identify with our own body, and
Mm.
also then figure out how to act. So, it when I give talks and I'll say, what is your body telling you? When I start getting to the teenagers, I know I have to watch out because the
They
guys
might
going
tell
through
you.
puberty are like, oh yeah, I'm listening to my body. And so then we have to bring in self-mastery. So let's make sure that we bring up that caveat. Another way of saying that is be virtue, the right time, the right place, and the right way.
Very good.
So yeah, I mean that's in my first grade book, and because we're saying the body is teaching you something, but then Pope John Paul speaks also about the inner movements of the heart, like recognizing them and evaluating them. So we're not setting aside the heart 100%, but at the same time, what you're saying to those women who listen to their body and trust their body, I think that's really, really good. And other things might say something like, when you're talking to a patient, let's say they're suffering from something like so there's some sort of fear, and so you might ask them like, what happens with your body when you are experiencing that fear? And so there's a way of getting deeper into the truth of who we are. I know of one psychologist, he once said to someone, let's say, he was saying something about my father. I wanted to get back at my father. There were some dad issues, and so I took a bat and I wanted to hit him. And you know what the doctor said? What part of the body did you hit him on? I'm like, tell me more. And why was he saying that? And this is Dr. Bob Schutz, who was basically saying, because if you only hit him on the shoulder, yeah, he's great. If you only hit him on the shoulder, you don't want to kill him. So it just shows like you just wanted to wake him up. You see, so various like little small things, indicators like that, I think might help a doctor in his or her practice.
What are some other ways that we don't listen to our bodies that we might notice better?
Yeah. So if you're like me, the other day I was so busy, I couldn't eat, or I forgot to eat rather. And then all of a sudden I started kind of getting a little bit dizzy. And I'm like, wait a second, I didn't listen to my body when I needed to get nourishment. I didn't want to listen to my body because I'm involved in a movie that I don't want to go to bed, So it's all the time that we're not listening to our body as a good teacher. Not to say that the body sometimes doesn't say the opposite of what we should do, but I think we should first say trust our bodies before we get to the caveats of self-mastery and virtue.
So how do we know when our body's being a good teacher?
Well, that's when we would talk, I think, about objective truth. So the problem is, some people, like let's say a person who is experiencing SSA, same-sex attraction. So one of the things we might help him or her, let's say it's a man, to understand is the truth of the body shows that two men are not designed to be together in that sexual manner. Two women are not designed in that sexual manner. And so even though I might have those feelings toward the same sex, that's when we're like, okay, maybe there's something that is giving me the wrong indication. And so then abstinence, of course, would be, the struggle. It's usually a struggle, but
yes.
Some of my friends, Emmanuel Gonzalez, he's just amazing. He went and lived the lifestyle and then came back and realized that his body wasn't made that way. And now he's a great Catholic giving talks to young people around the country, talking about it's possible to be chaste.
So, Monica, a question that I had that I thought of after putting together most of them is this. Truth used to be deductive, objective, and transcendental. But now we live in what Michael Warsaw called at our conference in Denver, a post-truth society. So many, especially the young, see truth as the opposite. They see it as inductive, based on experiences, subjective, and experiential. So in such a culture, what does the theology of the body have to offer to bring such skeptics and cynics to see the beauty of the truth of what the body is?
I'm so glad you asked that question, because Pope John Paul is a philosopher, a phenomenologist. Right. And what that means is experience matters. So in the very first part of the theology of the body, it's just so smart of him. What he does is he speaks about the second creation story. That's the one where Adam, the way he puts it is Adam
Yeah.
is in search of his identity.
Hmm.
And so Pope John Paul
Yeah.
doesn't discount experience. He doesn't discount our subjective understanding of things. So he says that that creation story is more of the experiential one. But the
Mm.
first one, the first chapter, those are the days of creation. That's when he says those are the objective truth. And so, in my mind, he's setting up the whole theology of the body at the very beginning by showing these two stories in Genesis don't contradict each other. They complement each other, just like
Compliment.
male and female. And so he even
Wow.
says there's one phrase. He says something to the effect of eh, theology is something to the effect of it ought to be experienced. Sorry, the objective truth ought to be experienced in its fullness. I think that's one of his pontificate main themes
Hmm.
is that so many. Can you imagine him like poor Father Wojtyła? These couples are like, you're kidding me. Like, we're supposed to not contracept? No, that's impossible. And he's basically saying, no, no, no. God's truth, God's objective truth can be lived by each subject. And by the way, you will experience freedom. Freedom is another big theology of the body concept that he gives to us. And so he's trying to show both of those can be wed together and both are important, objective and
Well, Monica, we've had several guests talk about the evils of pornography and screen addiction and the like. But in trying to think of medical problems from a theology of the body perspective, it makes pornography seem even worse because it's that detachment. It's really the personification of that person. All there is the body. There's nothing else. And then that reminds me of because of my practice, I see young women, young adolescents, immediate post-adolescent women that are really struggling with body image problems because of these images that are portrayed by the secular society. How do we speak better to that from a theology of the body standpoint?
yeah, so Pope John Paul, he actually, in the third chapter of the theology of the body, no, the second chapter of the theology of the body, he actually calls it an appendix. It's between the second and third chapter. He
Mm.
calls pornography pornovision. And what he says is ultimately that when we objectify the truth of the body, he calls it anonymity.
Huh.
Anonymity. And what he means by that is when a person reveals his body, especially in nakedness, he ought to be treasured. He ought to be, like a husband loving his wife.
Mm.
And so he says the wrong pornovision is the fact that no one knows that person, no
Uh,
one knows those people. It is this objectification, as you said, Chris, of the
mm.
person. And so then we relate it to us women, like when we women have to compete with this pornography,
Sure.
because most pornography is done by computers now. And
Mm.
did you know that
What?
yeah, they're fake women.
Oh my
Over
gosh.
over 80% of pornography now is also violent.
Mm.
And so what is that doing? It's training the brain to objectify someone. And so, with Pope John Paul, he helps to show it's not the body that is wrong, the naked body.
Mm.
It's the anonymity. And so, you might say this to, like I say to engaged couples, like, when can you be naked and unashamed? Well, you doctors, you're one because we trust you.
Yes.
Okay? We trust that you're not going to objectify us when we go into your room. So you have to guard your mind and your hearts with regard to that. But then
Amen.
the other place is in the bedroom with a husband and a wife.
Mm.
They could be naked and unashamed because they know each other and they know their bodies say, I am a gift to give and a gift to receive. But one more thing, because some people struggle. So many good Catholics struggle with pornography. So what I always say in my talks is like it can be overcome through grace. The way Pope John Paul puts it when he's talking about sins in the theology of the body is he says the Holy Spirit is meant to have an alliance with the human spirit in the heart. He speaks about the heart as a battlefield between good and evil. And he says, let love win. And it's because the third person of the Blessed Trinity, the giver of life and love, can win out if we allow him to. It's just a fascinating part of the theology of the body.
So,
Wow.
Monica, I was kind of fascinated by one of the slides from your talk where you say, be where your body is. How can we not be where our body is? What are you talking about?
Let me quiz you two men. Did you ever tune out when I was speaking just now? You were thinking about what's the next question. You were looking at me, but in a sense, you weren't where your body was. So sorry to turn it on you, Tom. So another way of saying this is
Sure.
the body speaks a language. And so if I'm looking at someone who is body to body present with me, and by the way, I love using that term, body to body. Now, if you say it to teenagers, they'll sexualize it, and so will others. But I say it to my special needs nephew, Nikki. Nikki, we're body to body. Put away your phone. We're body
I
to
was
body.
just
Put
thinking
away.
that when you said that, I was immediately thinking of devices because that's something you're doing with the body that says, I'm actually not here. I'm actually somewhere else, or at least I'd
That's
like
right.
to be somewhere else.
That's
Yeah.
exactly right. That's exactly right. And so we put those away. And so then we could be bodily present.
Mm.
Like another thing I say to parents, I gave a talk last night to parents, like 50 of them. And I'll say, one of the best gifts that you give your children is your bodily presence, your undistracted bodily presence. I think that is so profound. We also say it in some of the Body Matters books, those 18 books that I've written for children. We help them to like know to set aside social devices when they divide rather than
Mm.
when they join together. So hopefully that answers the question about bodily presence and be where your body is.
I think it does.
I'm curious, what other comments did physicians have after the talks you've given the last 4 years at the CMA conference? What did they benefit from? You mentioned Mikey, but what are some others?
Yeah. So one woman came up and she asked, like, what about psychology? What about something like that? And so that's when I would talk more. I mentioned just earlier, Pope John Paul speaks about the inner movements of the heart. And so I think counselors, psychologists, what they could do is they can help the person go deeper into the heart, and they will find wounds there. That's why they're there in counseling. I'm expecting, and so
Right.
and then for them to like identify the wounds and then speak the truth there, because so many times our wounds are because someone else viewed us in the wrong way. And so for him or her to speak the truth into those wounds, really powerful. Do you know the Anna Christie prayer? I love that
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
prayer. It took a different flavor for me when I read Mother Mary Frances. I'm pretty sure it's the book Right to be Mary,
Mm-hmm.
Merry, and it's
Yes.
about religious life. And what she
Yes.
says is she says that in your wounds hide me. Think about you doctors. If you pray this, in your wounds hide me, she says, what you're asking for is to be balm for people, to
Mm.
help heal them, because you're asking to be in the wounds of Jesus Christ. And by extension, all of us are the mystical body of Christ. So you're basically saying, I would like to heal these people. How profound that is, what you could do when you interact with your patients.
In your wounds, heal me. Yeah, I've always had a devotion to the wound in the side of Christ. And I remember St. Anthony used to talk about that. He had a special devotion there too. And I think he prayed that prayer specifically about being hidden in that wound of Christ. And that struck me for some reason, even at a young age. That's pretty
Yeah,
profound, Monica.
yeah. It reminds me of was it Saint Justin who said, by your very nakedness you healed us. In
Mm.
other words, he was naked and unashamed.
Mm.
He was totally integrated body and soul, and it was his body, by his bodily gift of self, he saves all of us. By his stripes we are healed. So I would agree with you, Tom.
Isaiah. A fundamental question I forgot to ask. How does theology of bodies see sex and gender as different or not different?
Yes.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a really good question. So I'll just quote Ryan Anderson.
Hmm.
He's of EPPC. And what he says is sex is the biological dimension or something like that. And then gender is the social expression. And what I say is theology of the body brings those both together.
Mm,
So, to say, another way of saying this is for us to approach people who are struggling with identity, especially transgenderism, just to say, look
Yes.
at your body. Don't you see? You're a man, you have a male
mm,
body. Now, that's what
yeah,
I emphasize because I don't think we emphasize that. We can
sure.
also say, no matter what you do, no matter the social expression, you're doing it in a masculine way
Yeah.
because that is your deepest identity, being this child of God who is meant for love. So that's what I think needs to be said to especially young people nowadays. Not one extreme, not the other. So I think those two together are really good, what Ryan Anderson has given to us.
I sometimes struggle with maybe the reconciliation of I understand the body expresses what it is, so to speak. But what if the body's mutilated? What if because of cancer, the genitalia are destroyed, or a serious burn? There's still something that's intrinsically male and female, even if it isn't visually recognizable. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I think it's not only fair but really important to say because I really speak to a lot of teenagers, middle schoolers, and high schoolers.
Mm,
And if they keep hearing the body reveals the person, and then they see a handicapped person,
yeah.
somebody in a wheelchair, someone maimed, they might take that
Right.
in a literalization way. And
Mm,
so I'm glad that you point that out. It's more like if you have a human body, no matter what it looks like, you are human and you are male or female. We could get into, there's only 2% of people who are born, they're born with some sort of defect, whether it's Down syndrome or Klinefelter's syndrome. Is that, how do you say that? I
Kleinfelters.
think
Yeah.
that.
fine filters,
Yeah.
yeah.
And others like that. And so, that's more complex. But this woman came out, she came up to after my talk and she's like, I hate it that people use that transgender stuff when my son is suffering from what's it called? 47XXY, which is
Mm,
Oh, sure.
Klinefelter. Yeah. And so she's like, just because he does that, like
mm,
doctors figured out he just needs these hormones and then he's fine.
yeah.
And so she doesn't want these exceptions to the rule to be
Hmm.
used for the transgender ideology.
Right.
However, what you're pointing out, Chris, is the exceptions to the rule don't take away from the dignity of the human person.
Yeah.
Pope John Paul says every person deserves a response of love, and that's our
Last minute,
obligation to
Monica,
see them that
what
way.
resources do you recommend for parents and what do you recommend for healthcare professionals?
Great. So, for sure, for parents, the Body Matters books. So, tobit.org, Theology of the Body, Evangelization, TOBET.org. And you know what? For you physicians, I would get Christopher West's newest book called The Eclipse of the Body,
Mm,
because you're going to deal a whole lot with this transgender issue. And so, Eclipse of the Body, I think, helps you to maybe talk to your patients about how they might view themselves, especially when they're wondering about their sex, their identity.
mm.
Beautiful. Thanks for being with us, Monica. I think listeners are going to love this.
Well, I love being on it. So thank you so much.
Yep.
And God bless you so much, Tom and Chris. Take care.
God bless you and your work. Take care.
Thank you. Bye.
Well, welcome back to Doctor and a discussion of theology of the body. But right now, we're going to discuss the answer to this episode's medical trivia question that has to do with sex differences in metabolism of all things.
Are sex differences real in metabolism? So which of the following three statements is true about women? Women do store more percent body fat. Is it because they eat more calories per kilogram of muscle? Is it because despite the fact that they eat the same amount of calories as men? Or is it despite the fact that they actually eat less calories per kilogram of lean body mass, that is muscle, than men? Well, the answer is C. Life is not fair. So even though women do eat less than men, per, kilogram of muscle, they still store more percent body fat. And that's just the way we're made. I don't know. What would you say, Chris?
Well, I would say that's just the way we're made. Yeah. I've spent the better part of almost 30 years studying women and their physiology and their metabolism, especially their reproductive metabolism. And women, I can tell you, you're much more interesting than men.
Oh, amen to that.
Right. If you're penalized a little bit on the metabolism, it's okay. You win in so many other areas that don't feel defeated.
Yeah, in this report on that, it said that even in the first half of pregnancy, women increase their percent body fat without any increase in energy intake, and it must have something to do, some protective effect in pregnancy. I don't know, Chris. Is that possible?
I wonder, but where I thought you were going with that is, the more I think about questions like that in light of our guest and Theology of the Body, it just reminds me of how terrible it is in the popular culture to try to make men and women the same. We could not be more different. We're made in the image and likeness of our Creator, but at the same time, we're radically different, equal but not same.
Correct.
And that difference, well, that should be celebrated. It shouldn't be argued with. We
celebrate diversity, right, Chris?
Right. We shouldn't negate that. It's what our Creator had in mind.
So, Chris, top 3 takeaways from Monica.
Well, we've had a good guest when we struggle to get only top 3 takeaways, right?
That's right.
I think my favorite is this idea that she expressed for healthcare workers. She said in general, more specifically, but that we can be evangelists just by doing our job well and doing it properly. That if we can treat patients and we can treat their body as an expression of their person and not as an object that needs to be sewn or cut on or treated with a salve, but we're actually treating a person, that we're being evangelists. And I think that can be very motivating, whether you're a dentist or a nurse or a podiatrist or Tom, even a dermatologist.
Even, yes.
The next one of my 3, I can't wait to get to tobet.org. Listeners, check out that website. I'm thinking we might spend a lot of time there. And then lastly, I really loved her description around this idea of listen to your body. What's it telling you? If you're angry, if you're afraid, if you're hurting, what's your body trying to tell you? Because it's telling you something. Can you figure that out and then use that knowledge for good?
Well put together, Chris. Thank you, listeners, for being with us for yet another episode of Dr. Doctor. You can find this and all old episodes on our website, drdoctor.org, and you can just click on episode archives and search over 280 episodes by topic or guest.
And now, for some reason, if you'd like to see us as well as listen to us, I can't exactly understand why you'd want to do that. You can just click on the YouTube link near the top of the homepage at drdoctor.org. And if you have a question or you have something you'd like us to cover and talk about, we'd love to hear from you. Click on Submit a Question.
This is Dr. Tom McGovern.
And this is Dr. Chris Stroud. We're signing off until your next dose of Dr. Doctor.